The world you know, the financial stability you take for granted, the value of the money in your pocket, it all rests on a single invisible pillar. A pillar built 50 years ago in the scorching deserts of Arabia. It wasn't built with steel or concrete, but with a handshake, a secret deal that reshaped the globe. For 5 decades, this deal has been the engine of American power. It allowed the United States to live beyond its means, to fight wars without raising taxes, to run massive deficits without crashing its currency, to sanction its enemies with the push of a button. It was the greatest financial magic trick in history. What if I told you the most powerful weapon in America's arsenal isn't a nuclear bomb or an aircraft carrier? It's a secret agreement made in a desert tent 50 years ago. An agreement that is the only reason your money has any value at all. But now, the magic is gone. The pillar is crumbling, and the world is about to change in ways most people cannot even begin to imagine. What happens when the glue that holds the global financial system together suddenly dissolves? We don't have to guess. It's happening right now. The era of the petrodollar is over, and the new era, the era of BRICS, has just begun. This isn't just economic history. This is a warning. To understand the future, we must first understand the past. We have to go back to 1971. America was in crisis. The Vietnam War was draining the treasury. Spending on social programs was out of control. The world was losing faith in the US dollar. The greatest financial shift of our lifetime has already begun, and you are not prepared for what comes next. Up until that point, the global financial system operated under the Bretton Woods Agreement. The US dollar was pegged to gold at $35 an ounce, and all other major currencies were pegged to the dollar. The dollar was as good as gold. But countries began to doubt America's ability to back its currency. They started demanding actual physical gold in exchange for their paper dollars. America's gold reserves began to bleed out of Fort Knox at an alarming rate. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon made a desperate move. He went on national television and temporarily suspended the convertibility of the dollar into gold. Temporarily. That was the lie of the century. The gold window never reopened. In a single stroke, the US dollar became a fiat currency, backed by nothing but faith and the credit of the United States government. The immediate result was chaos. The dollar plummeted, oil prices quadrupled, inflation ravaged the American economy. The 1970s became a decade of stagflation. The American century seemed to be ending. The dollar needed a new anchor. Something else for the world to trust, something else that every nation on earth needed. And the architects of American power knew exactly what that was. Oil, black gold, the lifeblood of the modern industrial world. You couldn't run a factory, drive a car, fly a plane, or power a city without it. Every country needed oil. And the biggest supplier was the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. In 1974, in the shadows of the OPEC oil crisis, a deal was brokered that would save the dollar and cement American dominance for the next 50 years. It was the birth of the petrodollar system. The deal was simple, brilliant, and utterly cynical. The United States agreed to provide military protection and weapon sales to the House of Saud, guaranteeing their security. In return, Saudi Arabia agreed to do 2 things. First, they would price all of their oil sales exclusively in US dollars. Since Saudi Arabia was the leader of OPEC, the rest of the cartel quickly followed suit.
If Italy wanted oil, they couldn't pay in lira. Japan couldn't pay in yen. They had to first exchange their currency for US dollars and then use those dollars to buy the oil. This created a permanent, artificial global demand for the US dollar. Every nation on Earth needed dollars just to keep their lights on.
But the genius of the deal was the second part. What would Saudi Arabia do with this mountain of US dollars they were receiving? The agreement stipulated that the Saudis would recycle these petrodollars back into the United States by purchasing US Treasury bonds. They would lend the money right back to the US government. Think about what this meant. The world sent real goods and services to America to get dollars. America sent those dollars to Saudi Arabia to get oil. And Saudi Arabia sent those dollars back to the US government in exchange for IOUs. It was a perpetual motion machine of finance. It allowed America to print money to buy oil and then have that money immediately loaned back to it to finance its government spending, its military, and its consumer lifestyle.
The dollar became the undisputed world reserve currency, not because it was backed by gold, but because it was backed by oil. The petrodollar system allowed the U.S. to run massive, chronic trade deficits without its currency collapsing. It allowed Washington to weaponize the dollar, cutting off enemies from the global banking system with sanctions, because almost all international trade had to pass through the dollar-based system. It was an exorbitant privilege, a financial superpower that no other nation in history had ever possessed. For 50 years, it worked perfectly, until America overplayed its hand. The cracks in the system began to show in 2008. The global financial crisis born on Wall Street almost brought down the world economy. The Federal Reserve responded by printing trillions of dollars to bail out the banks and inflate asset prices. The rest of the world watched in horror. They saw the guardians of the global reserve currency debasing it on an industrial scale to solve a problem of their own making. But the real turning point, the moment the world decided it needed an alternative, came in 2022. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the United States and its allies unleashed the most severe economic sanctions in history. They didn't just sanction Russian individuals or companies. They did something that had never been done to a major nuclear power before. They froze over $300 billion of Russia's foreign currency reserves held in Western central banks. Money that Russia had earned selling its oil and gas, money it thought was safe, was suddenly rendered useless with a stroke of a pen. They also cut major Russian banks off from the SWIFT messaging system, effectively exiling them from global commerce. The message to the rest of the world was crystal clear and absolutely terrifying. If you hold your national savings in US dollars or in US Treasury bonds, that money is not yours. It is yours only as long as Washington approves of your behavior. If you cross a geopolitical red line, your entire national wealth can be confiscated overnight. The dollar was no longer just a neutral medium of exchange. It was a weapon of mass financial destruction. For countries like China, which holds close to $1 trillion of U.S. debt, for Saudi Arabia, which was increasingly chafing under American criticism, for India, Brazil, and South Africa, this was an unacceptable risk.
The trust that is essential for a reserve currency had been shattered. The search for an alternative went from a theoretical discussion to an existential priority. And the vehicle for that alternative was already waiting in the wings: BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. For years, it was seen by many in the West as little more than a talk shop. But under the surface, driven by China's economic rise and Russia's geopolitical maneuvering, BRICS was steadily building the infrastructure for a new financial architecture. They created the New Development Bank as an alternative to the IMF and World Bank.
They started developing alternative payment systems to bypass SWIFT. They began increasing trade with each other in their own local currencies, bypassing the dollar completely. The geopolitical tectonic plates were shifting. The defining moment came in December 2022, when Chinese President Xi Jinping visited Riyadh. During that summit, Xi Jinping made a public call for oil and gas trade between China and the Gulf nations to be conducted in Chinese yuan. China is the world's largest importer of oil. Saudi Arabia is its largest supplier. It makes absolutely no economic sense for them to conduct their trade in the currency of a third country, the United States, especially one that is a strategic rival to China and an increasingly unreliable partner to Saudi Arabia.
For the Saudis, this was a golden opportunity. The 50-year-old security for oil pricing deal with the U.S. was fraying. America was no longer as dependent on Middle Eastern oil due to its own shale revolution. It was becoming more critical of Saudi actions. China, on the other hand, was their biggest customer and offered non-interference in their internal affairs. The stage was set for a betrayal 50 years in the making. In August 2023, at the BRICS summit in Johannesburg, the death warrant for the petrodollar was signed. The group announced a historic expansion, inviting 6 new members to join effective January 1, 2024. Look at the list of new members. This wasn't a random selection. It was a strategic masterstroke aimed directly at the heart of the dollar's dominance. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iran, 3 of the world's largest oil and gas producers. Along with existing members Russia and Brazil, the expanded BRICS Plus now controls over 40% of global oil production and an even larger share of proven reserves. They also secured control over critical choke points for global trade like the Suez Canal. The implication is obvious. You don't bring the world's biggest oil producers into an economic bloc led by China and Russia to keep selling oil in US dollars. The goal is clear: to de-dollarize the global energy trade, to create a closed loop where BRICS nations can trade energy, food, and technology among themselves without ever touching a US dollar or using the Western banking system. This isn't a future hypothetical. It's already happening. China is buying oil from Russia and Iran in yuan. India is buying oil from Russia in rupees and dirhams. The UAE and India have settled oil trades in local currencies.
And in January 2024, the expansion became official. Saudi Arabia, the linchpin of the petrodollar system, is now a member of the bloc dedicated to dismantling it. While there was no single press conference announcing the petrodollar is dead, actions speak louder than words. The 1974 agreement is functionally obsolete. The monopoly is broken. The world's most important commodity can now be bought with currencies other than the US dollar. The petrodollar is dead. The consequences, however, are just beginning to live. So, what does all this high-level geopolitics mean for you? Why should a family in Ohio, or London, or Toronto care if Saudi Arabia sells oil to China in yuan? Because for 50 years, the petrodollar system has been artificially suppressing inflation in the West. Remember the recycling mechanism? The world needed trillions of dollars to buy oil and conduct trade. That meant trillions of dollars were constantly leaving the United States and circulating overseas. They were sitting in the central bank reserves of China, Japan, and Saudi Arabia. They were lubricating global commerce. They were not chasing goods and services inside the U.S. economy.
This allowed the U.S. government to print massive amounts of money without causing immediate hyperinflation at home. We exported our inflation to the rest of the world. We got cheap goods and cheap oil, and they got pieces of paper that we printed out of thin air. It was the greatest deal in history for the American consumer. But now that process is reversing. As the world needs fewer dollars for trade, as central banks diversify their reserves away from the dollar and into gold or other currencies, those trillions of dollars currently held overseas will start to come home. They will flood back into the U.S. economy. And when trillions of dollars suddenly start chasing the same amount of houses, cars, food, and services, there is only one possible mathematical outcome: inflation. Not the transient kind we've seen recently. We are talking about structural, long-term, corrosive inflation that eats away at your savings, your wages, and your standard of living. The exorbitant privilege is turning into an exorbitant burden. This comes at the absolute worst possible time. The U.S. national debt is over $34 trillion and growing rapidly. For decades, America could count on foreign nations, especially the petrodollar nations, to buy its debt. They had to. But now, China has been dumping U.S. treasuries for years. Saudi Arabia's holdings are down.
Who is going to buy the trillions of dollars of new debt the U.S. government needs to issue just to keep the lights on? If foreigners won't buy it, the Federal Reserve will have to. That means printing more money, which means more inflation. Or the U.S. government will have to offer much higher interest rates to entice buyers. But with $34 trillion in debt, even a small rise in interest rates means the cost of servicing that debt explodes. It is a debt spiral, a doom loop, and the end of the petrodollar removes the primary prop that was holding it up. We are witnessing the end of an era, the unipolar moment where the United States was the undisputed economic and military hegemon is over. We are moving into a multipolar world, a world where the G7 is being economically overtaken by the expanded BRICS. They are building a parallel financial system, one immune to U.S. sanctions, one not dependent on the dollar. It won't happen overnight. The dollar is still huge. It's still used in the majority of transactions. It's hard to replace something so deeply embedded in the global plumbing, but the direction of travel is undeniable. The trend has snapped. What will replace it? We don't know for sure yet. Perhaps a basket of BRICS currencies? Perhaps a new digital trading unit backed by gold and commodities, as Russia and China have hinted. Perhaps a chaotic period of competing currency blocks. But one thing is certain. The era of easy American money is finished.
The implications are profound. For the U.S., it means a future of higher inflation, higher interest rates, and a painful choice between massive austerity or massive money printing and devaluation. It means a decline in global influence and power. For the rest of the world, it means a more fragmented system. It might mean more freedom for developing nations, but it also might mean more instability. The death of the petrodollar isn't a news headline. It's a tectonic shift in the bedrock of the global economy. It's a historical pivot point, like 1914, 1945, or 1971. Most people are completely asleep at the wheel. They are distracted by the daily news cycle. They don't see the tsunami approaching. The governments of the West aren't going to tell you this. They need you to keep believing in the system so you keep buying their bonds and holding their currency while they inflate away its value. They need to manage the decline slowly. But you don't have the luxury of time. The shift has already happened. The pieces are moving on the board. This is not a prediction of doom. It's a call to awareness. The rules of money have changed. What worked for the last 50 years, blindly trusting in the dollar and traditional stock bond portfolios, may be the most dangerous strategy for the next 10 years. History shows that when currency regimes change, wealth is not destroyed. It is transferred from the unaware to the prepared, from paper to real assets, from the indebted to the sovereign. So the picture is clear. The world is changing, and the easy money era is over. The question you should be asking now is not, why is this happening, but what can I do about it? If you sit back and do nothing, the purchasing power of your savings, whether they are in dollars, euros, or pounds, will likely be eroded by the inflation that is coming home. But if you prepare, you can not only survive this shift, you can thrive. History gives us a roadmap. When fiat currencies begin to wobble, when faith in government debt fades, smart money always flees to the same place: hard assets. Here is your battle plan for the post-petrodollar world. First, own real money. For 5,000 years, through every empire rise and fall, through every currency collapse, gold and silver have held their value. They are the ultimate insurance policy against central bank incompetence and geopolitical chaos. When the dollar loses its special status, central banks around the world will need a new, neutral reserve asset. They are already buying gold at a record pace. You should too. A portion of your portfolio should be in physical precious metals. Not paper contracts, but metal you can hold in your hand. Second, consider the new contender: Bitcoin. It is the only asset in the world that is digital, scarce, decentralized, and cannot be censored or confiscated by any government. In a world where the financial system is being weaponized, a borderless, neutral money is more valuable than ever. It is digital gold for the 21st century. Third, invest in things that people need, not things they just want. The new BRICS-led system is focused on the real economy: energy, food, metals. Look at companies that produce these essentials: oil and gas producers, miners of copper and lithium, agricultural giants. In an inflationary world, the stuff you can drop on your foot always outperforms financial paper. And finally, get your own house in order. Inflation is great if you have a fixed-rate mortgage, as you pay it back with cheaper dollars, but it is devastating if you have variable-rate debt like credit cards. Pay off bad debt as fast as you can. You don't want to be owing money when interest rates are soaring. The death of the petrodollar is scary. Change is always scary, but it is also an opportunity. The greatest wealth transfers in history happened during these exact moments. The old system is dying, a new one is being born. Don't be a victim of the transition, be prepared for it. Educate yourself. Take action and turn this crisis into your opportunity.